I still remember the moment the police broke down my door like it was yesterday. 1 second, I was strumming my guitar in my small apartment, humming a tune I had composed the night before. The next, two police officers burst in, guns drawn, and yelled, "Hands up." I stood frozen, confusion and fear washing over me as they slapped cold metal handcuffs on my wrists. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. "What's going on?" I managed to choke out, but they were just shouting orders. "You are under arrest for drug trafficking. You have the right to remain silent." In that instant, I felt the life I knew shatter beneath me, like a rug had been pulled out from under my feet. I was a musician, nothing more than a guy who wrote songs for friends in seedy bars and played gigs wherever he could get tips. I loved every note I strummed, every lyric I wrote, and every cheery voice urging me to play just one more song. So how could I be accused of trafficking kilos of cocaine? It made no sense. But as I was pushed toward the police car, reality hit me. My life was about to become a nightmare I could never have imagined. Through the dark windows, I caught one last glimpse of my apartment, my guitar leaning against the wall, my notebooks full of song lyrics scattered across the coffee table. I wanted to reach out, grab them, grab the fragments of my identity. But there was no time. They shoved me into the back seat, and the door slammed shut behind me, leaving me trapped in a steel cage, my freedom traded for a pair of cold, unforgiving handcuffs. As the police car's engine roared, I felt a knot in my chest. My phone vibrated frantically with missed calls from my producer and texts from my manager asking where I was. I had a gig scheduled for 2 days from now, a chance to finally get my act together. Now every plan, every dream, every melody I had ever composed seemed to be slipping through my fingers, destined to disappear forever into the dark void of disbelief. They took me to the police station, where bright fluorescent lights shone into my eyes as I was processed. Fingerprints, mugshots, my name written in bold letters on a nameplate. John Silva, they called me, with no reference to my guitar, no mention of my songs, no acknowledgement of the person I had spent years building. Just a name and a crime I had not committed, etched into me like a scarlet letter. During my first night in the cell, every second that passed felt like an eternity. The roar of fluorescent lights, the clanking of bars, and the distant screams of other inmates blended into a terrifying symphony. Lying on the narrow bed, listening to footsteps echoing down the hallway, I felt tears sting my eyes. How do you survive when your entire life, your reputation, everything you believed about yourself, is suddenly ripped away from you? I had no answer, only that I needed to hold on to. Something inside me, something they could never take away. Music. In the flickering light of the cell, I closed my eyes and began to hum the chorus of my favorite song, a gospel hymn my grandmother had taught me when I was a child. The melody rose from my throat like a prayer, each note a lifeline. Even here, in the belly of the beast, I vowed that I would not let this injustice silence my song. I would cling to that anthem no matter what, because it was the only thing standing between my soul and the darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. Before my arrest, I was just another struggling musician, surviving on tips and small amounts of money from gigs at rundown bars in the city center. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a closed cafe, my guitar always propped up on the bed and my notebooks full of lyrics scattered across the floor. Every night, I would plug my amp into my beat-up car, drive to the bar, and lose myself in the music, thinking that one day, I would write the song that would change everything. That dream felt fragile and essential, like a candle flickering in the wind, but it was all I had. My wife, Maria, sat in the front row at every show, her smile bright and encouraging, even when the bar was half empty. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. We shared a small apartment, cooked cheap meals together, and at night whispered hope for a future filled with sold-out shows and steady rent. We had our share of hardships, late rent, busted strings, and empty tip jars, but we faced them together, united by love and the belief that our music mattered. On the night of October 12th, I had just finished a show at the Rusty Nail, a dive bar known for its hard liquor and high spirits. My last song that night was a bittersweet ballad I had written for Maria's birthday. As the last chord sounded, I saw her in the crowd, wiping away tears of pride. We walked hand in hand, heading home with the echo of the applause still ringing in our ears. I never imagined that within a few hours, my life would be destroyed by a lie. 2 days later, at dawn, Maria and I were awakened by the sound of a battering ram pounding on our door. Before I could sit down, 2 uniformed police officers burst in and pressed against us, shouting, "Drug trafficking, search." Shock and confusion hit me like a block of iron. Maria screamed my name as they pushed me against the wall, pawing me roughly. It all happened in a blur: flashes of badges, the rough collar of my shirt, the cold metal of handcuffs closing around my wrists. All I knew was that they had charged me with transporting 2 kilos of cocaine across state lines, an impossibility. I had never touched the stuff, much less sold it. But their faces were grim, their questions matter of fact. "Where's your stash? Where's your dealer?" I stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." But they kicked in the door and found a sinister black backpack in my trunk. I protested that it wasn't mine, that I had no involvement, but they ignored me, reading me my rights and throwing me into the back of the police car. As they led me away, I saw Maria's anguished face pressed against the small window. She tried to tell them that I was innocent, that I was just a musician, but they silenced her with their hands over her mouth. The backpack belonged to my cousin Rafael, who had spent the night there. He had told me to keep it for a friend, promising to pick it up later. I believed him. I had no reason to think it contained anything illegal. But when Rafael didn't show up and the police traced the backpack to my address, I became an easy target. I was booked into the county jail, strapped to a bench, fingerprinted, and photographed. My name was typed into a computer screen. John Silva. The intake officer punched in a number below my picture. 384,752. In that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, surrounded by bars and a tile floor, I felt the walls closing in. Bail was set at $100,000, an amount we didn't have. Maria's eyes were red and puffy, but she refused to leave my side as they processed me. She kept whispering, "They'll believe the truth. I know they will," even though I could see the fear in her eyes. That first night in jail, I lay on a narrow metal slab, my wrists still sore from the handcuffs, my guitar and notebooks locked in the apartment as evidence. I hugged my knees to my chest and stared at the ceiling, reliving every moment I'd spent with Maria, every chord I'd played, and every dream I'd nurtured. How could a simple act of trust, holding a friend's purse, possibly send me into that abyss? I tried to muster up hope, but the cell was cold and unforgiving, and the echo of my name being called felt like a sentence already written. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the bars of my cell, revealing only the iron-hard bench and the tile floor below. My roommate, a burly man with a tattooed face, snored beside me, oblivious to my panic. The metallic clang of a gate opening sent chills through me as the officers herded the new arrivals into our cramped space. No one spoke. Every man's gaze was fixed on the ground, hopeless. It was as if I'd fallen into an abyss from which there was no return. My days fell into a rigid routine that seemed destined to break my spirit. Roll call at dawn, a cheapskate for breakfast, brief time in the courtyard under the gray sky, and then hours of silence, broken only by distant shouts or the jingling of keys. I wore the standard orange jumpsuit with a number that replaced my name, and the discomfort of the rough fabric against my skin was a constant reminder I was no longer John the musician. I was inmate No. 384,752. The guards enforced every rule with ruthless precision. They conducted strip searches with brusque indifference, rummaging through my belongings as if I had smuggled them in. One guard scoffed as he riffled through my few personal items, photos of Maria and my faded notebooks of song lyrics, muttering that dreamers like me don't belong here. The humiliation ran deeper than the worn bench I slept on. With each day, I felt myself getting closer and closer to despair, convinced that the outside world had forgotten me. Lunch was a greasy slab of mystery meat piled high on lukewarm potatoes, washed down with a cup of a thin concoction called soup. I gritted my teeth, refusing to let them rob me of my dignity, but my stomach growled with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Hunger for justice, hunger for music, hunger for a way to remind myself that I was still alive inside this cage. One afternoon, as I was returning to my cell after cess, I heard a soft melody echoing down the hallway. An old hymn someone was humming quietly enough not to attract the guard's attention. Intrigued, I walked closer until I found the source, a cellmate holding a battered guitar, strumming the opening notes of Amazing Grace. My heart raced. The music, my lifeline, had found me there. I sank to the floor, letting the soft chords wash over me, and for the first time since my imprisonment, I felt something like peace. I spent the next few nights memorizing the hymn, closing my eyes as I hummed each note, imagining every corner of my old apartment, every freckle on Maria's face. Some nights, I scribbled the lyrics on torn strips of toilet paper in the dim glow of the cell's flickering light. I wrote about my feelings, the injustice that burned inside me, the loneliness of the concrete walls, the hope that music still gave me. With each verse, I reconstructed the man I was, even as my body remained chained. The music drew others in. Soon, my once hostile cellmate began sharing stories of his youth and the forbidden melodies he'd learned from dusty radios. Together, we whispered verses late into the night, forming a fragile brotherhood built on shared melodies. During those hours, the cacophony of prison life, the slamming doors, the shouting of orders dissolved, replaced by the harmony of two voices that refused to be silenced. The walls remained, but inside our cell, hope found its way back. As the days turned into weeks, something remarkable happened. My newfound focus on melody sharpened my mind in unexpected ways. Instead of focusing on my anger at the guards or the hopelessness of my accusations, I channeled every ounce of frustration into creating new lyrics. I used furtive glances at legal documents to piece together the inconsistencies in my case, a mismatched signature here, a questionable lab result there. Music gave me strength, but it also guided me back to the fight for my freedom. 20 months behind bars, I forced myself to study every scrap of evidence related to my case. During those long, sleepless nights, I scribbled notes on smuggled paper and mental maps of court proceedings. My cell became a classroom and confessional, where I recited gospel lyrics alongside legal jargon I barely understood at first. Somewhere between the lines of Amazing Grace and excerpts from procedural manuals, a counterattack took shape. I would exploit the same mistakes that had been tripping me up. One morning, a new guard handed me a crumpled file on my cousin Raphael, who had finally come to visit after months of silence. Inside was a preliminary lab report showing that the handwriting on the cocaine sample indicated a different chain of custody than the one the prosecution had claimed. My heart pounded as I read it. The evidence against me was based on a test administered by a part-time technician with no formal certification. I felt a glimmer of hope. My voice, silenced by the prison walls, could finally be heard. During the next visitation session, I told Maria every detail, her tears streaming down the folded pages of the report as I recounted the chain of errors. "They're going to have to retake the test," she whispered, her voice trembling with cautious optimism. For the first time, I saw the ghost of a smile flicker in her eyes. In that moment, music and faith had sustained me. Now, the law itself could set me free, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Prison bureaucracy and reluctant lawyers could drown out the truth if we weren't relentless. My attorney, a broad-shouldered woman named Claire Martinez, had flown in from our hometown after Maria begged for a closer advocate. Claire visited me in the glass-enclosed booth of the visiting room, sliding folders under the glass panel containing new testimony. She spoke softly, "John, these lab findings are your ticket out. We're going to file a motion to dismiss the conviction based on newly discovered evidence. But we need more. Can your cellmates testify that the bag wasn't yours?" My stomach churned. Asking other inmates to risk reprisals would be dangerous, but I had no choice. For every note I'd taped to my cell wall, I now needed real witnesses. Over the next few weeks, I quietly approached men I'd bonded with during our nightly music sessions. My cellmate, Pedro, a former fisherman wrongfully imprisoned for fish smuggling, agreed to help. He testified that he saw Raphael leave the bag outside the visiting yard shortly before my arrest. Another, Luis, recalled overhearing a guard congratulate Raphael for tipping him off about a big hit, even though Raphael insisted the bag was harmless. Each story required courage, but the camaraderie forged through the singing of hymns gave them strength. These men knew I would do the same for them. We filed a motion for a hearing with new evidence. The trial date was set for early spring, coinciding with a series of unusually warm days. I spent those pre-trial mornings in my bunk, humming my gospel hymn and memorizing every question Claire prepared. I visualized myself standing before the judge, my voice steady, delivering the truth I had rehearsed 1,000 times. When the day arrived, Claire and Maria flanked me in a thin navy blue suit that barely concealed the resilience I had acquired. I felt empty and complete at the same time, as if the cage inside me was finally breaking. In the quiet wood paneling of the courtroom, I watched the once convincing prosecutor stumble as he confronted the lab technician's shaky credentials. Claire laid out a chronology of mistakes, failed tests, broken chain of custody, and false statements from those who insisted I was the only one present when the backpack arrived. My voice cracked only once, as I had described the moment I realized the cocaine wasn't mine, and then I calmed myself, reciting the same words Raphael had used. "Keep it for me." The judge's frown told me the tide had turned. Outside, Maria grabbed our daughter's hand and squeezed it. When the gavel finally sounded, time stood still. The conviction is hereby vacated, and the defendant will be released forthwith. A roar of relief erupted in my chest as the weight of months, no, years, of fear dissolved. The guard removed my handcuffs as Claire wiped the tears from her eyes. I closed my fingers around Maria's hand and, for the first time since that fateful October morning, I tasted the refreshing, terrifying taste of hope. From the darkness of unlawful imprisonment, the law had brought me back to life. The heavy iron door creaked open as the guard led me down the hallway one last time. The midday sun blinded me at first as I stepped outside, forcing me to squint. For years, I had known only cold cells and flickering fluorescent lights. Now, each breath of fresh air felt like redemption, an orchestra of sounds and smells I had long forgotten existed. My legs buckled as they carried me toward the gate. Other inmates watched from behind bars, some nodding in respect, others clapping quietly. I lifted my head, meeting their eyes. In that moment, I was not just a number. I was a symbol that injustice could be undone. The balm of music had guided me this far, and now I savored the harmony of freedom. When I reached the massive exit gate, my handcuffs were finally removed. The cold steel links clicked against the floor, mechanical echoes of my past life, as the guard unlocked the last padlock. A wave of emotion washed over me, relief, disbelief, and joy. I closed my eyes, letting the tears mix with the warm breeze on my face. Freed from the weight of false conviction, I felt reborn. Outside, Maria waited in the parking lot, our daughter clutching her hand tightly. Her eyes were bright with tears and hope. Maria ran to me, pulling me into a tight hug, her tears soaking my shirt. Our daughter wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face in my chest, and I held her as if I never wanted to let her go. In that embrace, all the months of fear and longing melted away. For a moment, I whispered a prayer of gratitude, thanking a power greater than myself for guiding me through the darkness. The music that sustained me had its roots in faith, and now it had paved the way to salvation. I patted my daughter gently on the back and brushed Maria's hair from her face, silently promising that I would never let her down again. We walked away from the prison grounds, past the austere walls and guard towers that had once held me captive. As we drove through the city streets, I saw familiar buildings, the small apartment where I wrote my first songs, the rusty nail where I performed that fateful night, and the courthouse where justice finally prevailed. Each landmark brought back bittersweet memories of who I was and who I had become. That night, I returned to my old guitar, its strings dusty but still resonant. I tuned it slowly, savoring each click of the pegs. The first chord I played rang clear and true, filling the room with a melody I hadn't heard in years. Maria watched, tears shining in her eyes, as I began to play a new song, a song born from the crucible of injustice and forged by the power of faith. As my daughter fell asleep on the couch and Maria leaned against me, I whispered the final verse of my new anthem. From the chains of falsehood, we rise again. Let music redeem and justice reign. In that moment, I knew that the darkest chapters of my life had given birth to a purpose greater than myself. Music had saved my soul, and now I would dedicate every note to helping others who suffered the same fate. In the weeks following my release, I returned to the humble stage of the local cafe where it all began. The same worn chairs and chipped tables welcomed me like old friends. I strapped on my guitar, feeling the polish wood beneath my fingers, and looked out at the familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even a few former inmates who had been released. Their applause was thunderous, but tender, as if celebrating not only my return, but the resilience of every soul the system had failed. I shared my story with the crowd, speaking in a voice tempered by months of silence. I recalled the horror of unjust imprisonment and the faith I had clung to through music. Then, taking a deep breath, I began to sing freedom's melody. The song had composed on crumpled pieces of paper. In my cell, each chord echoed a journey from injustice to hope, and as my voice filled the room, I saw tears shine on faces I had once known. After the show, I met with a former cellmate who found solace in the same hymn I carried. He thanked me for championing his cause, his sentence having also been overturned thanks to the legal team we shared. That moment sealed my conviction. My purpose went beyond personal vindication. I needed to build a community where wrongfully accused individuals could find support, guidance, and most of all, a song to lift their spirits. With Maria's unwavering support, I created Harmony for Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal resources and music therapy to exonerated inmates. We partnered with pro bono attorneys and local musicians to create workshops where clients could learn to channel their trauma into creativity. The first event was held in the basement of a small church, but the turnout exceeded our wildest expectations, with people coming from neighboring counties seeking refuge in song and solidarity. In one memorable session, a former inmate, struggling with PTSD, timidly picked up a ukulele for the first time. Hesitant at first, his fingers felt along the fretboard until he discovered a simple progression that resonated with his heart. As he strummed, the room fell silent, all listeners caught up in the universal language of music. I realized then that our mission was not just about court battles, it was about reclaiming dignity, one chord at a time. Today, our program continues to grow. We host monthly open mics at the community center, where exonerated individuals share their stories through song. Social workers, lawyers, and musicians volunteer to build bridges between justice and healing. Maria often manages the logistics, encouraging families to attend and witness the transformative power of melody. Our daughter, now a budding singer, performs alongside her father, a testament to the lasting legacy carved by grief. As I reflect on the journey from that first cruel knock on our door, to the cold prison bars, to the opening chords of Freedom Song, I am filled with gratitude. The music that once saved me has become a lifeline for countless others. Every note I play now carries the weight of those who still languish behind bars, falsely accused and silent, and I vow to keep singing until every voice, no matter how weak, finds its song. If you or someone you love has been wrongfully convicted, know that you are not alone. Visit harmonyforhope.org to learn how to connect with advocates and music therapists who are ready to support you. Share this video to raise awareness and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Together, we can transform injustice into a chorus of hope, one melody at a time.